Hello and welcome to Electric Sheep Season 2, Episode 1. I'm joined once again by Carl Sykes.
Hello.
And Elizabeth Jones.
Hello.
And our very special guest this week, we finally got him in the podcast studio. Yay. It's Richard Oelmann.
Hey, he's in the house, people.
Richard's actually part of the CDAL team. He is our lead web-based learning environment developer. So he is Mr. Moodle, basically. He's the man behind the Moodle at, I can't say University of Wales Newport anymore, can I? Because we're not that anymore. We've merged. We're now the University of South Wales.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's new season, new university.
And it's all new.
Same podcast.
Same podcast. So, before we'll be talking to Richard a little bit later on about kind of what he does and all that kind of stuff. But before we get into that, we'll do our usual weekly roundup of what everyone has been up to. So I'll start off this week with Carl. Carl, what have you been doing this week?
Well, this week I thought I'd talk about a website that I've been browsing. I don't know if anyone in the room's heard of it. You may very well have, but I hadn't, and I quite like the sound of it. It's called Early Bird. Right. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's
Nope.
Early spelled E-R-L-I.
Right, okay.
And essentially what it is it's a site that allows tech startup companies to put links to their new tech projects on this site, and it allows you to become an early user, essentially, an early adapter of new startup companies. So there's loads of great stuff on there at the moment, lots of really interesting kind of new projects that have fairly recently started up, and you can sign on, jump on board, get on board the early versions of these tech projects, and kind of feed back to the makers, play around, see what you can break, and essentially give feedback to the program makers to kind of see how they can shape and adapt them before they make them kind of live to the big wide world, as it were. But it's kind of a holding area essentially for all these places, so you don't have to go searching for all the new startup companies. They're all held nicely in this one place, and you can kind of dip in and have a little play around. Yeah. But it's really nice because I found so much new stuff from one place, whereas normally you kind of, you'll have to search for a particular thing and then kind of see what's out there and what you can use. But with this, it just lets you kind of dip into any area that interests you and kind of give it a go, really.
So is it mostly software then that the companies are developing that you can try out? Or
I mean, there's all sorts of different stuff. I mean, there's kind of software. There are online sites, and there's one I signed up to, which is a kind of a for people who are interested in film and cinema.
Right. And
it kind of works like a kind of a place that you can drop in, register the films that you're watching, find other people watching the same films, and discuss films with them and that kind of stuff. So that's just one example that I've looked at. But there's loads and loads of kind of software, mobile apps, all sorts of things on there that you can kind of dip into and play around with. And I think it's a great way for these companies to get their stuff out there and get some feedback and on what's right and what's wrong and what works and what doesn't before they kind of make it open to everybody else to yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That sounds fantastic.
So yeah, definitely say have a little look. And I think it'd be useful, especially for you, Paul, because you're always kind of finding new stuff and putting it out there on your mobile, on your site anyway. So perhaps it'll kind of cut out some of the hard work, as it were, essentially, because they're doing the job for you, which is great.
I like that.
But yeah, I mean, and essentially, I think the whole point is that it allows you, in some way or shape or form, to kind of try and shape the next sort of new thing that's coming out there. Gotcha. So yeah, Early Bird is the name of the site. I mean, obviously we'll put it up on the thing, but
that's really interesting.
That's really
I'm going to check that one out.
Yeah, it's really good. I can't remember how I stumbled across it. I'm not sure where I ended, how I got there eventually.
Was it on Reddit?
It might very well have been on Reddit, actually. Yes, it might have been on Reddit. But I think it's got a lot of potential. I don't know the site itself. I don't know how new the actual site is. But the stuff that they're advertising and the stuff that they're hosting on there at the moment, linking you through to, it's literally stuff that's fresh off the press, as it were.
Oh, wow.
So it allows you to get the first look at a lot of this stuff that potentially might blow up and be quite huge further down the line. So
brilliant.
Yeah, definitely worth a look.
We'll have a look at that one. Thank you very much.
You get to say that you were there before it was cool.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Like the time I showed you all in the office Gangnam Style before it actually came out and was big. I still feel as if I introduced you all to
doing Gangnam Style in the office. Will haunt me forever.
Oh, Rich, you enjoyed it. Don't try and say otherwise.
Elizabeth, what have you been up to this last week?
Playing on social media.
Okay.
But luckily that's my job, so it's okay. No, I've discovered this new to me, sort of social network called Keek.
Right.
K-E-E-K. And the best way I could come up with describing it is it's as if Twitter and YouTube had a baby.
Right.
They would have Keek. And it's like Twitter, you can post a very short update, But it's a video, so you can post 35 seconds of video. So people are uploading these straight from their phones. They're unedited and stuff. But it seems to be like, just everything. It's like Twitter was when it first took off, and people are going, why on earth would you use this? It's just kids posting about what they had for lunch and doing their makeup on camera and stuff, but just for 35 seconds, and it's very odd. But if you sort of are interested in people who are on YouTube, or there's like news sites doing updates and things, they're doing shorter in-between updates on Keek just to keep you updated, and then posting them to Twitter or other places or Facebook. But you can just go on to Keek centrally and follow people on there, just like on Twitter. So at the moment, it's being attached to other social media networks. But I can see it sort of going off on its own thing. There are so many users on there. If you're just looking at the update stream, it's updating so fast you can't keep up with it. So it really is popular already.
Yeah. Absolutely. I had a little kind of browse earlier when Elizabeth first showed me the site, and it's I think very much my response was, it's kind of like, when you log onto Facebook and someone says, I've just had something nice for dinner. Yeah. Well, now you can watch them have that nice thing for dinner in a 35-second snippet. But no, I mean, yes, again, I'm being a bit facetious there, but actually I can see it has a lot of use, and especially if you can tie it into other social networks as well.
Yeah.
And, I think
as far as I can tell, it doesn't have to be an unedited clip.
Right.
Like, it just tends to be because people are doing it straight from their phones.
Yeah.
But I have seen like news companies and film companies putting out promo stuff on there, so you could just upload sort of like little snippets and stuff. And it's just like, it sits in between. Why would you upload a 35-second clip to YouTube? It's that space in between. You need to say more than you'd say on a tweet or whatever.
Is 35 seconds, is that the upper limit?
Yeah, it just cuts you off at that point.
Do you have to upload clips, or can you record directly to the site? Do you know? So if you had a webcam, for example, do you know if you can record directly to it?
I don't
I'm not sure, but that's something we can look at. I mean, that would be quite useful, I think. Again, if you
you download the Keek app, and then it just cuts you off after 35 seconds and uploads it.
Okay.
It sounds very similar to Vine, which is something that Twitter's trying to put out. Similar kind of thing, recording videos, but theirs is 1 minute long, and at the moment it's only on the iOS. But, Keek sounds really good, so we'll definitely be checking that out.
I can see it happening on other sites as well. Either they'll try and adapt it. If other sites don't adapt that very quickly, Keek will take off on its own and become like a new thing, like Twitter.
Is it quite new? I mean, is the site...
It's not that new, though. Not like in terms of websites, no.
Yeah.
But
it's the sort of thing, like anything, I suppose, it just takes a kind of explosion of people to start using it, and then it becomes the big thing. And I guess it just hasn't had that explosion up to this point.
It's full of teenagers, so that means it's pretty popular, and it is relatively new. Yeah. So.
Excellent.
Once we start adapting it and putting educational content
they'll
on
all disappear.
Absolutely. Move on to the next thing. Yeah.
Yes, quite. Oh, that sounds really interesting.
Cool. That's fantastic.
So, Paul.
Hello.
I know you've got your smartphone out in front of you. I thought I'd drop the smartphone in now and just get it out of the way, as you mentioned it in every other podcast.
Every podcast we have, yeah.
But,
you'll have to upgrade now.
I know, exactly. So
I see one smartphone. I raise your smartphone.
Richard has
a Nexus 4.
He
does.
Very nice.
It's
very, very, very swish, very smart. Well, Paul, what do you want to talk about, or what is there a particular thing you've been reading or an app you've been using this week?
I want to talk about something called Class Dojo.
Okay.
Which it's not really very widely known in the higher education sector, but it's doing gangbusters in the primary education sector and the kind of the junior school education sector.
Right. I'm sorry, what?
Class Dojo.
No, it's doing what?
Gangbusters.
What's that?
It's a term. It means
I just let it slide. I didn't know what he meant either.
Big numbers.
Sorry.
I just let it
It means it's very popular.
Yes.
It's a Paulism.
Yes.
Okay.
Go with it. It's
I
fine.
thought I'd misheard.
Yeah, and basically, what Class Dojo lets you do, it is essentially a behaviour tracker stroke modification app, but it tries to, some people call it gamification. It tries to, essentially what it lets the teacher do is say to each student or each learner, I'm going to give you a little profile, and every time you do something good or bad in the classroom, I'm going to acknowledge that with some kind of reward via the Class Dojo website.
Okay.
So each time you do something good, you get 1 point. Each time you do something bad, you get a point taken off.
So like marbles in the jar.
Essentially, yes, it's like a star chart or something like that.
Yeah.
But what the nice thing about it is that every student, every pupil can create their own little avatar. It looks a bit like a moshi monster for those of you who are into that kind of thing. But it looks like a moshi monster, and their parents can log on to the Class Dojo website and see how their child's doing in terms
nice.
of it gives them a nice little kind of pie chart. So it's I hadn't heard of it before up until about a week and a half ago. When a colleague of mine said, it's really, really useful. They're a teacher in a primary school. And I had a look at it. It's really nice. It's really good. So if you are kind of working in the primary or junior sector, it's a very nice tool to have for the rewarding or tracking of good behaviour.
And I like the fact that the parents can log in and see it, because that again, the fact that the child knows that their parents will be able to see it, essentially could affect the behaviour, because they know that, unlike a star chart where nobody really sees it apart from the teacher and the rest of the class, it's out there for your mum and dad to see. And
it's really good. I mean, and the other nice thing is the Class Dojo, it's free at the moment, and their policy is for all of the early adopters that jump onto it, it's always going to be free. So if you get on there now, it won't cost you a penny.
Okay.
And there are free Android and iOS apps as well. So once you've set this thing up, you can have the app, if you're a teacher, you can have the app running on your phone or your iPad or whatever you've got. And so rather than having a big faff of, I've got to log into a computer and reward that behaviour, you just take the phone out, click on the child's name and say, right, I'm going to reward them. So you can do it on the fly if you want to. So there's also they've made a really lovely series of YouTube videos that explains how the system works. But there's a really nice one for educators to show the students, to show their pupils before they actually start using it in the classroom. It's like it's like a minute and a half. But it means that rather than the onus being on the teacher or the educator thinking, oh man, how am I going to explain this to my students? You can just fire it up on the interactive whiteboard or on a projector or something, let the video play, and then the really lovely thing is at the end of the video, it actually segues to the tutor or to the teacher in the classroom. It finishes up by saying, and now your teacher's going to explain to you how they're going to use Class Dojo in your class, and then the teacher can kind of pick that up and run with it. So it looks very nice. It's very thoughtfully put together.
Yeah.
And so if you haven't seen it already, please do give it a try, because it is wonderful.
Do they get rewards for different areas of behaviour and stuff?
Yes, you can define your own. You can and each it comes with some presets you can remove if you want to. So there's things like came to let the class prepared, or helped somebody else out, or contributed in some way. But you can add in your own rewards. Or behaviours that you don't want them to do as well. So it might be. I know a lot of primary schools, what they'll do when they first get the pupils in, they'll say, right, we're going to make some class rules up for our class. They get the pupils to actually come up with the rules. So you could, and not only, when I was a kid, they put the rules up on a big sheet of A3 paper rather than, But the idea is you could take these rules and put them onto your Class Dojo and go, right, these are the rules that you've come up with, so I'm now going to reward and track your behaviour in accordance with the rules you've come up with, and your mum and dad can see how you're doing as well. So, but it's very slick and it's very, very easy to use. I mean, I like the interface is really, really nice.
Right. Okay. So I like the fact we're kind of because yes, everything we talk about naturally is kind of HE or FE based normally, so it's quite nice to have something at a different level, but still could be potentially really useful. And I'm not sure whether it would have its use outside of maybe primary and secondary school. Maybe that's kind of more its focus at the moment. But potentially, I suppose
the main reason why it probably wouldn't be very, very popular outside for older children is that the avatars are very kind of cartoon-like.
Yeah, they are quite cartoon.
But I'm thinking, just for my two daughters, to be honest, rather than doing a star chart with them, I'm gonna make them one of these, and then we can. So I'll reward them for their good behaviour.
There is actually a sort of a version for adults, actually, thinking about something that I saw just the other day.
All right.
Called Habit RPG.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah. That it rewards you as an individual, set up the habits that you want to do.
Yeah.
So there's things you have to do daily, so they're called dailies, and then there's like your to-dos, and there's your goals for like the week or the month.
Right.
And you have to do, every time you do your habit, you tick it off on the site, and your character's health bar goes up or down, and if you miss things, your character's health bar goes down.
Right, okay.
and you start losing, and it takes you through like a little adventure. You've got your role playing as a little adventurer that has to like learn its craft.
It
or whatever.
almost sounds like a kind of little online Tamagotchi almost.
Yeah,
You've got to keep
except
it well fed and watered and everything else, but except it's you. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, there's a nice video on Techzilla Daily about it.
Right.
Cool. So what was that called again? Habit
RPG.
RPG. So we'll put a link to that and Class Dojo on the website.
Excellent.
Okay, so now it's time to talk to our very special guest, who is, as we've mentioned before, Richard Oelmann, who is our Moodle ninja. So, Richard, welcome along.
Thank you.
So, for those people who are listening who might not know what a Moodle ninja does, what does a Moodle ninja?
Secret.
Yeah. What do you do within the CDL team? And obviously, we know what you do, but tell us what do you do within the CDL team?
Basically, my role is managing Moodle for what used to be Newport University.
Yeah.
Not necessarily for the whole of the new University of South Wales, because what used to be Glamorgan used a different system. But for
That's
us
right.
in Newport, we're going to be using Moodle for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
So my role is managing that. Essentially, I coordinated the upgrade from our old 1.9 version to Moodle 2. I keep it running. I help the rest of the team with sort of doing little bits of training for them so that they can pass it on to staff and students.
Yeah.
And do some of that training with staff and students myself.
Yeah. So very much the kind of the architect, if you like, of the system, or rather the implementation of the system within, the Newport's campuses of the new University of South Wales. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty
And
much.
when when people get requests and they go, "Can you make Moodle do this?" and we go, Richard goes, "Yes."
Yeah. I mean, that's always been one of the plus points about Moodle in general. But it's lovely to have like staff on board that can actually mould the system and make it do whatever the students or the lecturers need it to do, either on a pedagogical basis or a logistical basis or an administrative basis. It's very nice. I mean, how does that process work then? How do you... So suppose someone comes to you and says, I would really like Moodle to do this, whatever it might be. What kind of steps do you take them through?
It's one of the differences, I guess, between being sat as part of the CDL team and being just a straight developer in the IT team is that being sat where I am in the CDL office, people are in and out of our room and they do ask that question, can Moodle do whatever?
Whatever, yeah.
And sometimes the answer is a very simple, yes, it already does it.
Yeah.
You click this button, you do this, this feature is available. Sit down and I'll show it to you for 20 minutes and send you away knowing what to do. Sometimes it's, that's a good idea. Maybe we can make Moodle do that with a very simple tweak. And it's a sort of change one line of the code in the background or something of that nature.
Yeah.
And we can put that in place almost immediately. If it's any bigger than that, what we tend to tell people is that I'll spend a bit of time looking at it, and I've got not just our live Moodle that we use with the students. I've got some test systems as well, and I can sit there and I can play.
Yep.
And I can do what they want, hopefully. And make it work. Or I can turn around and say, well, actually, I'm not going to do that because I know it's already being done by the Moodle headquarters people for the next release anyway.
Yeah.
So bigger things might take a bit longer. But I haven't come across anything yet that anybody's asked me, can Moodle do this? And we've had to say, no, and it won't.
Yeah, yeah.
We've had a few where it's not at the moment, but we can do it, or it's coming through for the next release.
Yeah.
Perhaps it might be useful for people who aren't as familiar with Moodle. People might know that Moodle is a virtual learning environment, but how it differs from something that maybe a university makes from scratch on its own, or something like a piece of software that is brought in as a complete piece.
Okay.
Moodle isn't either of those things.
No, it's not. Moodle is what's called open source software, which means in Moodle's case it's free, and a lot of open source software is. In Moodle's case, and like I said, in the case of a lot of open source software, that doesn't just mean it's free as in it doesn't cost anything. It actually refers to sort of free speech and the license that it's done under. And what it means is that the code that makes the program work is released in such a way that developers or users or anybody that's interested can actually look at all the code, all the programming that makes Moodle work.
Yeah.
And if you want to, you can tweak that code and you can release it again. You can send it back to the community. And the way open source projects tend to work, the big open source projects, there's a lot of rubbish hobbyist stuff out there in open source land as well, of half-finished things that an individual has done. There's some brilliant things that individuals have done as well. But projects like Moodle and Linux and LibreOffice and Firefox, these are all what they call open source software, which means that you or I or someone with a bit of a geek or hacking interest who wants to can go and dig into the code and fix bugs for themselves or make improvements for themselves, change it a little bit, release that back to the community if you want to. The only restriction really is that if you take open source software and you change it and modify it, when you do release it back, you have to release it with the same license.
Yeah.
So you have to release it with the same open source license. It doesn't stop you charging for it. Open source software doesn't have to be free. But the drawback for you as a developer is that if you make those changes and you release them as an open source thing and try and charge people for it, because you've released the code, somebody else can download that code and they can release exactly the same thing for free.
Yes.
Which is why most of it does tend to be free. But it's got disadvantages, I suppose. People look at it and they look at the wide sort of collection of open source stuff that's out there, and they do bulk it all together with the sort of hobbyist things that are half-finished projects. And there's a website called SourceForge, which is one of the sort of main sources of open source projects. And if you look at the thousands of projects that are on there, probably 75% of them are half-finished and never will be finished. But at the same time, if you look at the big projects, Moodle, Firefox, LibreOffice, Linux in all its various flavors, these are all open source projects that have active communities that keep on developing them and keep pushing them forward. And you then look at some of the things that people like Windows or Microsoft Office and things like that bring into their new versions. And you often realize that actually those were put in place in the open source versions 6 months, a year, 2 years earlier in some cases, because open source is so much faster moving, because it's the community responding to what people want that much quicker.
As regular listeners will know, we champion open source virtually every week, to be honest. But I know one of the concerns when I speak to people outside of this organisation, people will have genuine concerns if they're not familiar with open source. They will automatically lean towards like a commercial product. So, for example, they'll go, "Oh, I know Microsoft, therefore I'll go and get SharePoint as my document management system." And in most cases, that might not be, particularly for education, the best platform to use. But do you think there has to be, not necessarily a technical knowledge, but more of a kind of a confidence or an ease or an understanding about what works and what doesn't for people to engage in open source?
Yes, I do. I think there's two pretty basic things that come down to the nub with open source, really. The one is, I guess I've touched on it already, really. There's a lot out there which isn't very good.
Yes.
Because it's free, because it's open source, because anybody can do it. It's a lot like saying there are thousands and thousands of pianists in Britain. How many of them are actually any good to perform at a concert? Doesn't mean they can't play the piano. Doesn't mean the software isn't out there, but it doesn't mean you want to listen to them either. At the same time, so there's that. There's a lot of not very good stuff out there, to put it bluntly. Yeah. There's also the attitude of, if it's free, it's got to be rubbish. You get what you pay for. Yeah. If you're not paying lots of money, it's not worth it. And that's not necessarily true. You do get what you pay for, but you pay in different ways. The payment, if you like, with open source software is that it isn't always as familiar as what you used to. A computer comes downloaded with Windows already. You're used to it. You've paid for Windows with that computer. You might not realise it, but you're paying sort of £50 or £100 of the cost of that computer is your Windows license. Now, for me, the first thing I do is get rid of that Windows off there and put Linux on there because it's open source. It's what I like. It does the job for me because I'm familiar with it. To do that for somebody who isn't familiar means that they have their cost, if you like, of the open source equivalent of putting Linux on instead of Windows isn't a financial one. It's a time spent to learn a new system.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So there is a cost to open source. I mean, free, as in free beer, doesn't exist, does that really? I mean, you
much
go
to
down
Carl's disappointment.
Yeah, I know. You go down the pub, you get a free beer. The response is, it's your round next time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and like with an institution like this, just because we use Moodle doesn't mean it's free to the university. Like, it's free for the software, but we still need Richard and the IT team to run it and edit it and tweak it to our requirements. And sometimes, that might be, if you were doing that on a smaller scale, that makes it cost more than you'd be willing to pay.
It can. It depends on the scale that you're using it and the particular package that you're using. Something like Moodle, which benefits from tweaking like we do and like I do here, then for a university like us, we need somebody like me to do it. Yeah. For let's say the primary school that might be looking at Class Dojo that you mentioned earlier, I've been there and done that as well, and you might not need to tweak it as much. You can use it straight out of the box and just use some of the plugins. Or you can pay the commercial side of it. There are plenty of partners and people that will manage it outside, which is cheaper than a full-time person like me, but still frequently cheaper than the commercial alternative, which I won't mention any names at the moment, but there's plenty of them out there. Other packages like LibreOffice or OpenOffice, I use all the time, and I rarely use Microsoft Office. I use LibreOffice even if I'm on a Windows computer. It's free, it's open source, but I've never tweaked LibreOffice in my life. It just does what I want it to do. I don't have to tweak it. It just is a replacement for Microsoft Office for me. I know it wouldn't be for everybody. For example, if you use a lot of Visual Basic macros in Microsoft Office, they're not going to work.
But most people don't.
But most people don't. If what you use is a basic spreadsheet, a basic PowerPoint presentation software, and basic word processing, not by basic, I just mean not using the very complicated stuff on it, LibreOffice is perfect. If you're writing a dissertation, you don't need macros and Visual Basic and all those sorts of things. You need something that does the job.
Yes. Are you listening, students? Save yourself £100.
Yeah, I mean, even at the sort of student rates for Microsoft Office, you can download LibreOffice free. and it does everything you need it to. Because of the web design stuff I do quite a bit of, obviously, just tweaking with logos and things like that. And I use, here it comes, a product called Graphics Image Manipulation Program, or GNU Image Manipulation Program, more commonly known as the GIMP. Cue laughter. And there are arguments that rage on the net all the time because people say that the GIMP is a replacement or an alternative for Paint Shop Pro. And then you get the professional artists turn around and say, but it doesn't do this, and it doesn't do that. No, it doesn't. But how many times in my life have I ever needed to?
Yeah.
And I don't. So why should I go out and pay the license for Paint Shop Pro when the GIMP does everything I need it to? And far more than I will ever do.
Yeah.
Let's face it, most of what I do, I could probably do with Paint.net. But it's free, so why not have the extra bit? I don't use Internet Explorer for anything other than testing websites. I hate it. It's a personal bugbear of mine.
So we don't like it either.
Firefox and Chrome are open source and they're free. Again, I could, if I wanted to, and other people do, go into the code of them and tweak them, and rebrand them, do whatever you want to them. But you don't have to. Just because it's open source doesn't mean you have to be a geek or a hacker to use it, to tweak it. It's there.
Yeah.
And I will guarantee that every single one of our listeners out there now is actually using open source at this moment. We're recording this using Audacity.
Well,
it's open source.
Yeah.
You're listening to it on the internet. Very, very few of your internet providers will be based on Windows or Mac-based servers.
Yeah.
Google, Amazon, all the rest of them, all the big server farms, their servers run on Linux. So almost certainly your internet connection is running on Linux. If you've got a broadband router in your house, the chances are the software on that router is running a version of Linux or open source software. If you are using an Android mobile phone, Android is open source software. It's out there. Yeah. It's everywhere. If you've got a personal video recorder at home these days, the chances are the software in there is based on Linux.
Yeah.
It's open source. Now, I will definitely guarantee as well that if 99% of our listeners out there are using open source at the moment, 99% of those listeners will never tweak any of that open source code.
No, absolutely not. No.
They won't. They won't need to. They won't want to. They've got no interest in doing it. It just works. Or they want something that just works. And my argument has always been that if it just works for you, why go out and pay for something else? That just works. I mean, I'm not arguing that Microsoft Office or Mac or Windows or whatever doesn't work. But why go out and pay for the bells and whistles if you don't need them?
Yeah, definitely.
If the open source software does what you want it to do, and as I said, a lot of what I use does far more than I'll ever want it to do, and in a lot of cases does a lot more than the commercial stuff does. If you don't need to pay for it, if it's available free and open source, who cares?
But you're absolutely right. I mean, going back to something you said a little while ago, it is very much a fear of the unfamiliar that stops people from taking that first step. So, you know, we've all worked with somebody at some point where, just as an example, going back to Internet Explorer, you know, we say, okay, well, there's issues with Internet Explorer on a particular piece of software, whatever it might be. If you put Firefox or Chrome or something on, you'll be fine. No, I use Internet Explorer all the time. It's what I'm used to. I don't want to change over. Yeah, but if you don't change over, you won't be able to get over the issues that you're having. Well, I'll just stick with Internet Explorer and not use that bit of software then. And it sometimes it just boggles the mind, but you can understand why that kind of fear of taking that first step.
That familiarity is a big thing. Microsoft Office is perhaps the biggest example.
Yes.
Almost every computer that you use in a school or in a university will have Microsoft Office installed on it. It'll have Windows as its operating system or Mac OS. But even the Mac OS ones will probably have Office for Mac on them. Because it's what most people are familiar with. But if you're buying a computer for yourself, and if, as I say, if what you want to do is your assignment, your dissertation, your little bit of project work, you're a student. Why spend £100 on Microsoft Office if you can download something that does what you want it to do as well as you want it to do for nothing?
Think of that extra £100 to spend on beer, people. that you're
It's
losing
open
here.
source software isn't just free beer.
Or send it
it's
to Carl.
actually saving you beer.
Yeah.
Yes, if you want to send the £100 in a cheque directly to
Or
me,
just
you
the
may
beer.
payable to
Just
or
the beer is fine.
Yeah, we'll take the beer.
Yeah, I mean, it would be remiss of me at this point not to mention OSS Watch because those guys are funded by JISC, which is they're funded by the government, but they are the chief advisory service for open source software, particularly for further education and higher education institutions within the UK. However, their website's open to everybody, and on their website there's a lovely page called Open Source Options for Education. And so if you're an educator, you can actually go on here. Well, anyone can, but you can go on here, and it breaks things down, and it gives you a table which gives you options that are open source software as alternatives to their paid for counterparts. So, for example, under the e-learning table they basically say, well, there are 4 things you might want to consider. So they mention Moodle, they mention Sakai, 2 versions of Sakai, and something else called Canvas. And they say these are comparable alternatives to the paid for versions of things like Blackboard, Echo 360, StudyWiz. They've got something called Frog, which I've never seen, but essentially,
don't want to.
No. But essentially, that's actually a really nice table. So if you're listening to this and you are an educator, you're thinking, hang on a second, like my department or my school could save a little bit some money here. Have a look at this table, and they're on Twitter. You can actually give them a ring and just speak to a real person, and they'll advise you. I've met them before at various trade shows. They are lovely, lovely people. But it's stuff like this that particularly we are living in times when we have to kind of tighten our belts and save money and that kind of stuff. My attitude has always been, if you've got money to spend on kind of information technology or e-learning, spend it on the hardware.
Yeah.
Never, ever, ever spend it on the software because. Like Rich is saying, 99% of the functionality that you need you can get from free stuff. So you have to ask yourself, is the extra 1% worth £500, £1,000, £2,000?
Yeah.
And go and invest it in all that, getting your Wi-Fi capability and your, so your internet's fast enough and your servers are fast enough, because they never are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's the same for our listeners as individuals as well. I mean, we're talking about big institutions and that sort of thing, but we've just said about the £100 for Microsoft Office. If you don't actually need the extra power of Office, of Windows itself, you can spend that extra money on beer or a more powerful computer, your internet connection at home, whatever else you need it to, and still have all the power that you need to do what you want to do from the open source software. And that's the crucial thing, I think, is whether you're buying commercial software or downloading open source software, the key factor shouldn't be how much it costs or doesn't. It's, does it do what you need it to do?
Yeah.
If it does what you need it to do, it doesn't matter if it's free. If there's a free alternative, as Elizabeth just said, the extra money to pay for the commercial bit that does the extra 1%, what you're effectively paying for then is the £1,000 or the £100 from Microsoft Office to do that 1%, not to do everything.
So Paul's given us a site for advising for big things for education, so like VLEs and stuff. So say I am an average computer user. I have a standard PC or a Mac running their respective systems with their standard browsers. I do some normal documents, like you say, on Word documents, spreadsheets. Maybe I do a tiny bit of video editing using the standard software that comes on it. What else do I do? A bit of picture editing with my photos, bit of photoshopping on my night out pictures and that sort of stuff. And other sort of normal things that people are going to do. Replace my systems with open source.
My first suggestion, if you really want to be drastic about it, is dump Windows, put Linux on there, and everything is already there.
Okay, but
yeah, I know what you're going to say.
Is it going to just install, no problems. I
Yes.
don't need to do anything because I've heard, partitioning and scary things and.
With Linux, you can go down one of two routes and anything in between. You can do it the geeky, hacky way.
Yeah,
of
let's
doing
not do that way.
everything command line, and this is what scares people about
Yeah.
when you say Linux. Is everybody still thinks back to the early 90s with Linux, and it was all command line. It was all you've got to type in this foreign language to make it do anything.
As far as I recall, Windows was a lot like that back then.
Yeah, it was. But people don't see that Linux has moved on the same as Windows has.
So which version of Linux? Recommend me a flavour.
Okay. Well, given that I like the taste of it anyway, my personal favourite at the moment is Mint. Linux Mint. Basically, it comes on a DVD. You put the DVD in your computer, and you can run it direct from the DVD without changing your Windows if you want to. So you can test it. You can try it out. If you want to install it then, there's a little icon on the desktop which says Install Mint. You click on it. You wait about 30 minutes. You fill in a couple of things that say what your name is and what you want your username to be and where in the world you are so that it can set the time right. And you go away, you make yourself a cup of tea, and you come back, and the whole system is there for you, including LibreOffice. GIMP is on Mint, different flavours of Linux, different distributions come with different sets of software. Audacity's usually on there. There's a media player. There's
Okay, but let's go through them. So
Yeah.
Linux Mint would replace my operating system.
so that would replace
Yeah.
Windows.
Audacity's for audio editing.
Yeah.
We've got GIMP for images.
Yeah.
What else did you
got
say?
LibreOffice.
LibreOffice
for all
for
your
Microsoft,
office.
and all of these, apart from Linux itself, all of these work on Windows as well.
Yes.
They're not just
You don't
Linux.
have to get
no.
Linux.
All of these bits of software that we're talking about, they work on Mac, they work on Windows, as well as Linux.
Okay. So what else have we got? Let's say a media player. So
I tend to use something called Banshee, but there's Rhythmbox, there's Amarok. There's 3 or 4 others as well. That it almost depends what you want out of it.
Yeah.
The one thing I would mention with media players and audio and visual actually is if you're on a Windows machine or a Mac, you tend to use Windows Media Player, which is best at playing Windows media files. If you're on a Mac or you've got Apple type things, QuickTime type things, you tend to use QuickTime. QuickTime's not always very good at playing Windows media files. Windows media files and not Windows Media Players not always very good at playing QuickTime files. Download something called VLC.
Absolutely. I knew you were going to say that. I swear by VLC.
It
I
plays
wouldn't use anything else.
everything.
Yeah.
Audio, video, it doesn't matter what format it's in. I've downloaded stuff or been given stuff from all kinds of video cameras and different things that normally you'd have to use their own software for first to convert it to a QuickTime or a media player or something like that. VLC will just play it. So, and again, that's Linux, Mac, and Windows. Front end of it doesn't look very good. There are better front ends, but if you've got things that you want to play in strange formats, if you're a music geek as much as I'm an IT geek, then VLC is a tool you'll want anyway. Where do we get to? Browsers, Firefox and Chrome.
what else do people do?
Video
on computers?
editing. There's a few of them out there. OpenShot, KDN Live is a Linux only one, but OpenShot works on Windows as well.
Well, I know what the next question is going to be for anyone out there who's listening at the moment. They're probably thinking, wow, there's like all this free stuff, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the Linux Mint comes on a nice little DVD. And they're probably thinking, well, that's fine, but where do I get this mythical
Magic
DVD
DVD.
from? How do I get one
Okay.
if I've decided this is the route I want to go down?
How do you get one? There are 2 ways, or 2 very straightforward ways. If you want to go down the Linux route, the easy way to do it yourself is to go to a website called DistroWatch, and you can have a look at the pros and cons of the different distributions there, choose the one you want, and download it onto a DVD and try it out. The other way, which is even easier, go down to WH Smith's or Tesco's or someone else, look for a magazine called Linux Format or any of the Linux magazines. They all come with free DVDs on the front cover of them, and choose whatever distribution that's got that is that month's flavour.
Unfortunately, the magazine costs £150 to buy, but that's not.
No, they usually cost about £5 or £6.
I mean, there is
come with an instruction booklet, so.
and will come with a sort of easy to download thing on there. Yeah. The only drawback with that is if you want a particular distribution, if you specifically want Mint, or you specifically want Ubuntu, which is one of the other big ones that people might have actually heard of, because that's the one that sort of started hitting the headlines last year as a competitor for Windows. You might have to wait a couple of months or search a couple of magazines to get the specific distro.
But that's only if you're very determined not to go online.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, if you want Ubuntu, there is something called Woobi, WUBI, which will let you. It's a piece of software you download on your Windows machine, and it will install Ubuntu alongside your Windows installation. So essentially, you're trying it out, and you can keep it if you want to. But the idea is, unlike if you install Linux, you can install Linux with Windows. It's getting a bit nerdy now, but the idea is, if you have a normal Linux installation, the computer will boot into Linux first. There's a thing which says, okay, what operating system do you want? What Woobi does, it boots into Windows first and then says, do you want to go into Ubuntu, this Linux version? So for people who are thinking, oh my God, I can't buy DVDs and I don't want to... sorry. You can get this thing called Woobi. It's completely free. You download it, you click on the Go button, and it installs it like it would install any other piece of software, a game or whatever you want. And you reboot your computer and it says, hey, do you want to go into Linux or do you want to go back into Windows? And if you go back into Windows, everything's as it was. If you go into Linux, you then into this Linux operating system. But at any point in time, if you want to get rid of it again, you just go back into Windows and you uninstall this Woobi like you would a game or another piece of software, and it's gone. So, I mean, it's only, as far as I'm aware, it's only Ubuntu does that at the moment. Is that right, Richard?
It's only Ubuntu that does that specific way of doing it at the moment, yes. There are a few others that will do similar things, but that's the easiest one. Yeah.
That's the friendliest.
That's the friendly one, yeah. I mean, there are other ways of doing it by installing VirtualBox and running it in there, but Woobi's the easy one.
I mean, the main thing I like about Linux in particular, when I'm talking to I'm sure all of us are unofficial tech support for all of our families, and you know, whenever you go round to someone's house, it's like, oh, can you look at my computer for me? And you end up having to defragment the hard drive and run a virus scan, all that kind of stuff. If you're running a Linux machine, your hard drive doesn't get fragmented. No. You don't have to run any of these maintenance tools. You don't. I don't think there's any viruses out for Linux.
I run an antivirus software on my laptop. It's so that if I'm sharing documents that get emailed to me and back out to another Windows user, that it doesn't get sort of transferred. But
for your system,
almost. I don't think I've ever come across anybody that's had a virus on Linux at all. I won't say they don't exist, because
that was something that Mac users used to get really smug about. That there weren't any viruses.
And Linux users get smug in the same way as well. And I think there's a danger in that, because the minute you say there are no viruses is the minute your computer crashes with a virus. But I've never come across one. The reason I run an antivirus is to protect other people. If I've got things coming into me and I'm sending them on to other Windows users, if I've got an antivirus software on there, then it'll pick it up, it'll delete the virus out of the file before I forward it on to
which is very good of you, Rich, because you know you could go down the line of, well, if you're foolish enough to still be using Windows, quite frankly, then you deserve the virus you get.
Yeah,
it's very good of you.
On that some notice of family tech support, one of the tests that a lot of people put to open source and Linux and other things is, can my granny use it? Well, the story I would say to that for Linux in particular, but LibreOffice as well, because it's part of what I installed, I do the tech support for quite a few members of my family, including my dad. my dad was looking for a new computer, a new laptop, 12 months or so ago. And up to this point, I'd been spending, half an hour a week regularly, if not more, doing various bits of how do I do this? Can I do this? My Windows is so slow. My thing has broken. Can you reinstall my printer for me? Can this happen? Can that happen? The sort of tech support things that I'm sure we all get asked on a regular basis.
Yes. Yeah.
When he bought his new laptop, I put Linux on it for him. Ubuntu at the time, because it was just before Mint sort of overtook Ubuntu, and it was what I was using at the time. So I put Ubuntu on there for him. Now I get a tech support phone call about once a month rather than once a week.
Yeah.
And that tends to be more a case of which button do I click to make it do this rather than it's not working.
Yeah.
Or it tends to be my broadband router's gone down rather than the laptop itself. So from a stability, from a tech support side of things, my family support requirements have dropped dramatically since my dad and since a few other members of the family have started using Linux, LibreOffice, and open source tools instead of the commercial alternatives.
I mean, I must admit, we had a laptop that was going to be binned because it kept overheating and the power just kept cutting out. And before it got binned, I was like, well, there's nothing actually wrong with it other than it's overheating. So I thought, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll format the hard drive, I'll put Linux on it and see what happens. That thing has not overheated once, and it's on permanently now. It's acting as my main media server in my house, and it just hasn't overheated at all because the amount of the processor consumption of the Linux operating system is that much lower. Because I don't have to have an antivirus thing running, and it's got a very, very small footprint, doesn't it?
Very
Linux.
small.
So
compared to Windows, I mean, Mint and Ubuntu and some of the other big ones are getting bigger and are closer to what Windows is. But the other side of that is, if you're comparing the footprint size of, let's say, Mint with a Windows installation, don't forget that on top of that Windows installation, you need to add the footprint for Office, PaintShop Pro, and all the other bits that are already included in the disk. Because that's the other thing when you install Linux is that 30 minutes I said I'd go away and make my cup of tea for and come back. When I come back, Office is on there. GIMP is on there. The browsers are all set up. Everything is there as part of the distro. You can do it the other way and install a bare bones Linux in about 10 minutes and then spend another 48 hours tweaking it and doing whatever you want to. But why?
Okay, I have another imaginary scenario for you. I am the same person, and I am amazed with my wondrous new open source computer.
Windows or Linux?
Linux. Linux,
okay,
yeah.
fine.
It's all Linuxed and gimped and...
Wearing its rubber mask.
Yes, exactly. But I am still not a techie person. How can I say thank you or help with the open source thing? Because these things have been made by random people around the world for free for me to just play with. How can I say thank you? How can I help out with the project?
It varies from project to project. Most of the big projects, there are a couple of ways that you can help out. You can either join the community and, as I do with Moodle, I'm active on the community, and the help I've got from people there, I give back by helping other people. I do a little bit of sort of feeding things back into the community, but mainly my support is not financial in any way. It's I'm active on the community and I help people out.
And you don't have to be super techie to give tech support. It can be a case of what do I press?
Yeah, exactly. When I started giving that support, it literally was I'd learnt 2 or 3 things on the community from other people. People started asking the same questions that I had. I thought, I just found that out. I can tell you that. And it's developed from there. Most of the communities as well, most of the big projects will have sort of donate facilities on their websites as well.
I noticed Firefox has it a lot.
Yeah, click and contribute to, things like that. The other way, actually, which brings us back a little bit to what Carl was saying about what he'd been looking at, the early adopters thing I've just been involved in the last week or so with an early adopters thing for a plugin for Moodle, actually, which actually links what Elizabeth was talking about as well, with this sort of idea of video clips. Because somebody proposed the idea of YouTube Anywhere, being able to record directly onto YouTube from within your Moodle page. So you click on the normal editor in Moodle, you have a YouTube button on there, and you can sit in front of your webcam and you can record something direct into YouTube, or download a link or something that's already on YouTube. Yeah. So that was proposed, and nothing happened for a while because there weren't any developers who had the interest in it, wanted to do it for free. So nobody took this project on. And then one of the Moodle, sort of my equivalent in another institution, I guess, a guy called Joseph, who runs a site called Moodle News, went onto a site called Indiegogo, which is a site that enables something called crowdsource funding. And that's been in the news recently for all sorts of game things.
The Kickstarters, well.
It's an equivalent of Kickstarter type thing. Yeah, that's right. And they put a project on there for this YouTube Anywhere. They contacted one of the developers who's done some other video and language stuff within Moodle and said, look, how much would you want to do this project? And they raised, well, it was a fixed funding of just over $1,000 for the creation of this project. And they did it through this Indiegogo, through the equivalent of a Kickstarter project. So Justin, who actually did the development, will get paid for that development by, I've put a bit in, other people have put a bit in, but basically he'll get $1,350, I think it was, for developing this, rather than having to do it free in his spare time because he's a full-time teacher, developer for other things.
And just giving feedback can often help these projects.
The community thrives on people saying, we want it to do this, or it doesn't do this, or this other project does it this way. Can we think about that for our project? Or bugs, even. I mean, every bit of software has bugs, commercial software as well as open source software. The big advantage with the open source stuff and the fact that it's community driven is if there's a bug, you don't have to wait until the next release or the next bug fix download or Microsoft's Tuesday downloads that come out just about every week to fix various things. You can wait for the next release if you want, but chances are if you report a bug in any of these sorts of open source software, somebody will tell you how to fix it and you can tweak it yourself. Or you wait a week until the next upload is done. For Moodle, there's an upload comes out every Wednesday with what they've done in the development cycle and what they're doing the next time. And if there was an actual bug in there, it gets fixed. If you don't want to do the whole download again, you just take the one line of code or whatever that's there and you fix it. Because it's open source, you can access the code if you want to.
What's next for yourself in terms of, we've got here at the University of South Wales, we have a roadmap, we have a plan. So for anyone who is maybe studying with us or working with us, what can they expect from Moodle when it gets upgraded in the summer? What's coming that might pique their interest?
Okay. Students aren't going to see very much different other than a rebranding for the new university. They will see a slight difference if they're using any of the online editing tools. So if somebody sets them an assignment which requires them to type in online, they'll see a little difference in the tools that are available for that. Simplifying them in the first place, but giving a sort of one-click button to give them the sort of power tools as well. Other than that, students will... the one bit students will see is their My Courses page will change a little bit. A little bit more flexibility there and it'll work faster. But again, that'll be more obvious to staff than to students because most students only see a maximum of 5 or 10 modules anyway. The big advantage with that change will be for staff who see more than 20 modules.
Right, okay.
Because they're going to be able now to put them in whatever order they want to, click and drag them around into order, decide how many of those modules actually show up on the page.
Right.
So rather than, if you're a program leader or a department head, for example, you as a member of staff might have access to 60, 70, 80 modules.
Yeah.
At the moment, those all list on your My Courses page.
Yeah.
But you might actually only teach on half a dozen of them.
Yeah.
You just need to be able to access
Sure.
the others because you're a leader. Well, now you'll be able to, or now in the summer when we update, you'll be able to say, I only want to see the half dozen that I
Right, okay. That's
teach
helpful.
on.
Yeah.
But I will still have lecturer access
Yeah.
to all of the others without having to re-enroll myself every
Right.
time I want to.
So I suppose that's going to make it less overwhelming, if you like, or intimidating
Yes.
in some way.
Yeah, that's right. Other changes, again, this will be more obvious to staff than to students. Full blind marking is going to be available. Hopefully this YouTube plugin that I just mentioned will be available. That's still in beta at the moment, and I'm testing it. That's
Right,
one of the advantages of having contributed to it. I get access to the code early, like on Carl's project previously. So I've got early access to the code. I can test it. I can respond back to Justin, and if anything needs to be tweaked, changed, or whatever,
Gotcha.
it can be. But hopefully, well, not hopefully, that will be ready for when the next version of Moodle comes out.
Right.
The other big one that will affect the look and feel of things is there's going to be a few new course formats and layouts available to staff as well. We put the grid format in when we upgraded to Moodle 2, and
Yes.
a lot of modules have adopted that rather than the long scroll of death that,
Indeed,
that can appear. There's a few alternatives to that now as well. There's going to be one that's tabs. You can click on each of the tabs to find things instead of the icons that look good, but they do take up a lot of room on the top of a course page, particularly if you've got 20 or 30 sections with an icon for each of them. If you've got 5 or 6 sections, great. If you've got lots of them, you get a scroll of death of icons instead. So there's a tab one, there's a collapsed topic one where everything can be shrunk down and expanded when students need it. So those will be new for people as well.
And it's worth noting as well that, I mean, the vast majority of all of these things that are coming in have come as a direct result of staff and students at the university saying, we want this. I mean, I was at an event, and I'm not going to drop any names on this one. I was at an event for a commercial product, and people were talking about, various features that they want. And the chap there was like, well, we can't do that, but we are doing this. And then the response from the audience was, well, we don't need that in our institution. And the chap at the front was like, yeah, but other institutions have asked for this. And it was like, well, that's fine, but you can't tweak that commercial product to meet the bespoke, unique needs of a particular institution. So one of the things that we are able to do with the Moodle platform, with yourself, is say to all of our educators and our learners, what do you need it to do? And then we can just do it.
We're back to the staff walking through the door, asking the question, and me saying, yes, it already does, or no, not at the moment, but we can make it do. Carl got on Skype to me a couple of weeks ago about, can the quiz module do this particular way of asking questions? Similar to a magazine, if you've got all A's, you're this sort of person. If you've got all B's, you're this sort of person. That kind of quiz. No, it doesn't. But I was able to find another block and just do a couple of little tweaks to another block that did. And very quickly we were able to test that, make sure it wasn't going to crash our system, put it in place, and the tutor that wanted to be able to do this particular type of questioning was able to put that in.
So for those folks who are maybe let's say they're working for this new University of South Wales and they've heard that staff are able to put in suggestion requests and all that kind of stuff. If they wanted to get involved with that process into kind of shaping what happens next with Moodle, how would they work with yourself? What's the best way of them actually getting involved with you, and what would that entail?
The easiest way, first of all, is to to speak to me or to one of the rest of the team and just have a conversation. Tell me what you want it to do, and we'll talk about whether it already can or whether we can tweak it to do in the next version. Again, Carl and myself had a meeting a couple of months ago with some of the lecturers down in City Campus. They wanted it to be able to do. Could it do? And we were able to say, yes, it does for some things. No, it doesn't for others, but we can make it do. Or, no, but are you aware that the university has this other external thing which isn't part of Moodle but does what you're asking for? And all sorts of things like that. The other way, then, is we have, as part of the CDAL pages on Moodle, we have a forum for people to ask questions, put suggestions, or that I can use to feedback what the developments are and get people's feedback on those. And what tends to happen then is I will put those onto our development version of Moodle. People can try them out, give me their feedback, and then we can decide, are they good enough to go on the live one? Do they actually do what is being requested or not before it actually goes on to the live one? But the easiest way to get access to that is come and speak to me or one of the team first. We'll point you at that website. You can subscribe to that forum and contribute that way. But the first step, I would say, is come and speak to us.
So, Richard, if people want to be able to get in touch with you and drop you a line and ask you a question, but it may not necessarily be kind of internal staff or students, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you? Do you have are you on Twitter? Do you have a Twitter handle that they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, I have a Twitter handle which is at Richard_Oelmann. I also have a website called editcons.net, editcons.net, which has my Twitter feed on there. It also has a lot of the sort of free and open source software things that we've been talking about as one of the sections on there, and a link to a table similar to, or a glossary that does a similar sort of job to the one Paul was mentioning earlier.
Brilliant. Well, we'll put details, we'll put the proper links on so people can find you onto the website. But then if they want to kind of follow that route and get in touch, I know you'll be more than happy to kind of hear from people.
Definitely.
Brilliant. Okay, well, that's all we've got time for this week. So I'd like to, first of all, thank Richard for coming along and recording with us. It was nice to finally get you in the studios. Thank you very much to Paul and Elizabeth, as always, for co-hosting with myself. And essentially, from me, thank you very much for listening. And hopefully we'll catch you again very soon on the next episode of Electric Sheep.